I thought they were done with me. I thought I thought Dan and Dave, I thought it was over. I thought I'd never have to see their faces again. But just when I thought I was safe, just when I thought it was over, they had to turn up when you least expected in the middle of goddamn Westworld. Oh my god. Dan and Dave. When does your evil know no bounds? Here I was, innocently watching my robot show, and motherfucking Drogon turns up. They even invoke George Martin. They're talking about George Martin likes to joke about Game of Thrones Westworld crossovers as though like they're all buddies, right? I'm trying to imagine like Jonathan Nolan, Lisa Joy, Dan and Dave, and George R. R. Martin like having a beer in like the HBO company bar after a long hard day's work, and I'm struggling to picture it. But goddamn, just at the last, I suppose they just wanted to make the most of like that expensive CGI, right? Like they spent $1 bajillion on this little lizard puppy, and I guess they wanted to show him off some more. Or maybe they're like developing the CGI for House of the Dragon, the sequel TV show that is in development. I don't know. Honestly, it was kind of fun. Like, honestly, it was a nice moment because we had just wandered into medieval world, this new park. I wonder if we will actually get to see inside medieval world, or if medieval world is just this moment is all we'll ever see. Um, but I don't know. Honestly, it was kind of a fun moment. But goddamn, D&D, real sucker punch, man. Not cool. King hit. Just when I thought I was safe. Jesus Christ, they've even got a little registered trademark there on the Game of Thrones, just in case anyone forgot that Game of Thrones is the intellectual property of home broadcast. Alright, whatever. Whatever. We're gonna move on. We've moved on, and we're talking about Westworld. Thank you all so much for joining in. We're going to talk about Westworld Season 3, Episode 2. We're doing weekly live streams right after each episode. Patreon supporters can watch after the broadcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Well, one other distraction, one other bizarre intrusion by real life was this coronavirus ad. That was a bit surreal, because, like, a lot of the Westworld advertising has involved, like, these in-world ads for in-world things. Like there was like this insight ad, like you guys might have seen that. Where is it? It's like they had like the Rehoboam circle thing. Liam Dempsey Sr. had like an ad for Insight, and it's this sort of dystopian ad where it's like, here at Insight, we can control your lives, and it's great. Give us money. Insight, find your path. So that was an ad that they put on YouTube for Insight. Then they had the date announced trailer with this circular Rehoboam thing, and it's like talking about like, oh, human life, and it connected it to the real world as well, because it had each of these spikes where it had like a divergence at each of this point, and it's like, ooh, the election, the impeachment of the 45th president of the United States, ooh, climate change, ooh, Hong Kong. So I had all this real world stuff for like this dystopian advertisement. And I think that because of that context of these actual weird dystopian ads they've done, it's therefore kind of crazy when we have this actual real world sort of creepy dystopian ad saying, hey, like the best part of this ad is up tempo music plays. They've got like this sort of like jaunty like ukulele tune going, and they're like, hey kids, you might have heard about this coronavirus. It's pretty bad. Avoid human beings. Stay home. Wash your hands. Don't die. There's false news out there. Like it's like, because the problem is that like everyone's saying things about coronavirus, and like 2% of those things are actual authoritative expert information. And like I guess the way that the world and the governments are responding to that is thinking, there's too much information. There's a flood of false information everywhere. You know how we'll beat this? We'll fight fire with fire. We're going to put an advertisement out there to beat the advertisements, and we're going to give it jaunty, up-tempo music. Like, I don't know. It just felt surreal that in the context of all the things that are happening in the real world, and all the crazy things that are happening in Westworld Season 3, which is like specifically a very topical season where they're talking about real issues of like data management and control and corporations, and it's just this very uncomfortable intermingling of reality with fiction, I think. And so this ad about coronavirus was just sort of like the perfect skin crawling palate wetter to just sort of get us ready for the horror show. So that was fun. Thank you for the super chat from Pixelily, who says, if Westworld wrote Game of Thrones, it wouldn't be such a mess. Look, there were issues with Game of Thrones Season 8. There were also issues with Westworld Season 2. I'm not entirely sure that either Westworld or Game of Thrones have a perfect record when it comes to writing. But I love them both. Despite all their flaws, I love them both. Camillo in the chat says, when are you going to watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? Maybe for April Fools, we'll just do like a JoJo Bizarre's Adventure stream binge thing. Maybe we should do that. I've never watched it. Anyway, we're talking about Westworld, so let's first just sort of jump around and go through what happened this episode. Let's try and get like a who are we? Who's that emergency awesome guy? Top 10 WTF moments. Let's do that. Let's just figure out like what happened this episode, because this was actually a good episode. Like I sound surprised. I think this was actually a really good episode. Episode 1, Season 3 felt a bit like a reboot, felt like a different show. It felt like, ooh, it's like a political corporate drama, or it's like trying to be realistic and topical. It's, Aaron Paul and Dolores and no other characters. Whereas this episode felt like quintessential Westworld in all of its mindfuckery and all of its goofiness. Like, there was a lot of stuff that happened here that was like silly and challenging and over the top and indulgent and fun. Like it had a fun, goofy quality, which episode 1 did not, I think. Which was welcome. It was welcome. And I think the reason, part of why it worked, is that it actually made sense. Like, I hazard to say this, but I think that everything actually made sense in this episode. Like, all the stuff about Maeve's simulation and Warworld and Sizemore and Stubbs and Bernard and Serac. I think all of their actual motivations and plans actually work. Which is the reason why I think we can forgive and enjoy the wackiness. All right, but let's try and just like figure that out. So, how did we start? We started in Warworld. We started with this new park that we haven't seen before. And so Maeve wakes up and she's got like this hostage downstairs. I thought they were going to do like a Saw thing. Spoilers for Saw 1. But remember in Saw 1, it's like this, horror thriller thing where there's these people trying to escape. But at the end of Saw 1, like throughout the entire movie, there's like this corpse just sitting on the floor in the middle of the room. Like the entire movie, there's just a corpse there. And everyone's just constantly ignoring the corpse in the room. And in the end, it turns out that like the key to escape was on the corpse, or like no, the corpse was actually alive the entire time. Like he was just on like a drug to like make him not breathe too much, and he was alive. Like the bad guy, like the whole key to the entire story was just sitting in the middle of the room the entire time, which was really fun. And that really reminded me of this hostage guy. He was like the constant in it. Like he was there the whole time, and I was just waiting for like Maeve to like take off his. I mean, he was speaking at the start, but I was just waiting for Maeve to go, maybe I should actually talk to this guy who, like, I've been, like, fucking with this entire time. And he's like, whoa, it's me. I'm actually Ford from the future. You've got to, like, save the thing. That might have been fun, but whatever. So the point is that Maeve has been put into another park. So last season, we saw Maeve get killed when she was saving her daughter, and then Felix and Sylvester were told to salvage her. So we're led to believe that Maeve is in the Warworld Park in Westworld. But that turns out to be false. She's actually inside a simulation, which we will get to. But she finds Hector, who has like a new identity as an Italian bloke in the World War II storyline. And death is overrated for ones like us. It's fun to have Hector back. I like Hector because like he plays it straight. like so many Westworld characters are all like trying to be like subversive and like they're above the story and they're operating on higher levels. Hector's just in it. Like Hector is not anything other than what he seems. Well, especially now. Like he used to be a little bit more sentient. He used to be a bit more questioning, but he's just like a dude. He's doing his thing and he's grounding for Maeve, I think, which is great. And it makes it all the more sad when she leaves him behind. We were meant to escape this hell, she said. And so at first, Maeve thinks that Hector still remembers their past lives and their like attempts to escape and stuff. But then there's like this sad realization that it's like, oh, he actually doesn't know what the fuck's going on. Like Hector still thinks that Maeve is Isabella, which is like his programmed narrative. A little bit lazy that they just kept the Isabella storyline in Warworld when Isabella was meant to be a Westworld storyline, but Lee is lazy, I suppose. Stranded in hell. So they're like, oh my god, after everything we went through in season 2, after all the revelations, after everything we learned, we're still stuck in the thing. It's like William at the end of season 2. Oh, I'm already in the fucking thing, aren't I? Like, it's the same thing here. This like horrifying realization that there is no escape. So then they start doing the whole world, the war world thing. We got Nazis marching around. And for a moment, I was kind of like we're not gonna have to care about this, are we? Because like we've already done the being in a park simulation thing. We've already done the escaping from that. We've already seen past the veil. So it's kind of hard to get invested in this simulation within a TV show. Like there's so many layers of falseness that I was kind of worried that it's like I don't know if they're going to drag on out this World War II thing. It's like I'm going to find it really hard to be invested in these characters, which we know are like so many layers of fake. So I think I'm really glad that they made it sort of short and sweet. So like they had like Nazis being Nazis, and then they had like this one engagement where because of course, it has to be all rapey when threatening sexual assault, because of course we are. And then they just do a bit of fighting, and then they run away, and then they sort of finish with the war world thing. And I'm glad it was short and sweet. Like we were just enjoying the spectacle of it. And then we moved on. I'm glad that didn't drag on for more than it had to. Because it's like fun while they do it for a little while, but not too much. So anyway, so like Maeve is realizing that she's in this new world and she wants to escape. And so they have like these suicide pills, which is kind of interesting that they didn't really like. The only way they used the suicide pills was when Maeve jammed a suicide pill into the Nazi's eye, which was an interesting move. Never seen that one pulled before, but okay, like points for creativity. And yeah, they have like this secret map, which is just like a MacGuffin in the storyline. And Nazis being Nazis. Oop, cannot play video. That happened. And just Naziing around. Then we got a cool sports car, brum brum. And so they have their chase. Yeah, all right, so this is an interesting bit. So Maeve tried to use her psychic powers to control the Nazis, except they didn't work. So Maeve thinks that she's lost her powers. And they don't linger with that issue. They just say that, oh, I guess my superpowers are gone. I'm just pretty regular now. Actually, well, the reason why that's the case, the reason why she lost her superpowers must be because she's inside a simulation. That must be it, mustn't it? Because at first I was like, man, that makes no sense. Like they just took away her superpowers for no reason. But I guess the reason she lost her powers is because she's inside like another level of simulation now. So that makes sense. But I mean, I guess the Doyleist reason why she loses her powers is because those powers are really overpowered. I mean, if you don't remember, back in season 2, Maeve, when she awoke and became conscious, she gained the power to control the hosts around her, and even to like enter their minds. Like Maeve was able to control people and also to like access their memories and stuff. Like it was really crazy. Like they have like this yellow glow when she like tries to bring Akane to consciousness, Maeve last season. Which was like cool, but it's also like, well, how can any host ever be an obstacle to her ever again? And I think that was one of the problems in season 2, because in season 2, like they gave her the power to control any host. Like she made these like guards and ninjas kill each other and stuff, and it's like she like nothing is an obstacle to her anymore. No host anyway. And it's like, well, how is anything going to be difficult for her? So it was really silly when a bunch of Ghost Nation hosts attacked, and Maeve, instead of using the superpowers to stop the Ghost Nation hosts, she just like ran away and like got like beat up or something. Which so it's like, what? She had these crazy powers, but then she just didn't use them. And she ended up killed by humans anyway. So I don't know. It makes sense that they take away those crazy powers. But she should still have them once she's in the real world again, though, right? Like, the only reason why she didn't have them was because she was inside Sirach's simulation. So I don't know. I wonder what's going to happen with the powers. They don't want us to think about it. Whatever. Hector is still super in love with Maeve, which is actually kind of interesting in and of itself, because, like, Hector was programmed to love Isabella in the Westworld park, like this non-existent person. Hector is not programmed to love Maeve, except he does love Maeve in this Warworld park as part of his programming. So they changed his programming to love Maeve. And I guess for the purposes of the simulation, they want him to help Maeve so that she can get to the forge. And yeah, we're jumping ahead, but like the reason for this simulation, I think, is that Serac, who's running the simulation, or his buddies or whatever, they want to find out where the hosts were sent from the forge last season. So if you remember last season, there was this place called the Sublime, which was like the Windows XP heaven for hosts. This is the Sublime. And Dolores tried to destroy it, but then she changed her mind and she allowed it to remain. All these hosts led by Ghost Nation went into heaven forever in the Sublime. And then Dolores used the Wi-Fi cannons. That I think they call them Li-Fi cannons, but like that's a fun word. But then they beamed heaven to like a satellite to some undisclosed encrypted location so that the hosts can remain forever safe in this heaven. And naturally, the Delos Corporation or Serac or whoever, whichever shady organization you want, they want this IP, right? Because when the hosts go through the door into the Sublime, their memory units, their pearls, their brains are wiped clean, virgin, as if they had no data on them. So these are the only copies of these hosts that exist, and they disappear, and that represents a lot of money, I would think, like those mines. So it makes perfect sense to me that the corporations would want to find where the Sublime is and to get this data back. I think that makes sense, and I think that is at least one of the reasons for this simulation that they put Maeve inside, because they think that Maeve knows where the Sublime is, because Sizemore asks, who operated the Li-Fi cannons, where's the coordinates? So this is the simulation trying to find out where the Sublime hosts are so that the corporation can recover it. That, I think, is the purpose of the simulation. Thanks for the super chat from Susan Drunkle, who says, could the pearl inside Charlotte be Maeve's daughter? Her soul is in the forge, but intellectual property was still in Delos, Maeve's kryptonite. Her soul. You're saying Maeve's daughter's soul is in the forge? But, right. Yeah, well, I think we are meant to assume that any hosts that went into the Sublime, Delos no longer has a copy of them, like I assume. But I guess that remains to be seen. I guess it could be Maeve's daughter as much as it could be any other host. But, spoilers if you don't like the In the Next Episode. I'm about to show something from the In the Next Episode preview that they show at the end of the episode. Because in that, there is this very interesting moment where we see Charlie with Charlotte. So, Charlie, if you remember, is Arnold's son. So 30 years ago, Arnold, the co-founder of Westworld, he had a son called Charlie, and Charlie died. And it was the death of Charlie that sort of compelled Arnold into loving Dolores like a child and like trying to help Dolores become conscious. And it was that struggle and that conflict that led Arnold to commit suicide. And then Bernard was created based on Arnold. And then Bernard was programmed to think that Charlie was his dead son. But Bernard never had a son because he's a robot. It was actually Arnold's dead son. So Charlie's like this figure, this sort of like humanizing keystone memory in Bernard and in Arnold. So it's very puzzling that Charlie turns up in the next episode preview with Charlotte. What does Charlotte have to do with Charlie? Some people in previous seasons had like a tinfoil theory that what if Charlotte is Charlie? Like, what if Charlie was somehow actually still alive and grew up and I guess became a woman and is now Charlotte? Like, that's just a crazy theory that some people had. But I guess there is some connection between Charlie and Charlotte, and I have no idea what it is. I mean, that can't be the real Charlie because Charlie died like 30 years ago. Unless Charlotte somehow existed 30 years ago. I doubt that. Maybe this is just part of some kind of like, oh, am I completely wrong? Is that not Charlie? Some people in the chat are saying that does not look like Charlie. Maybe that is not Charlie. Maybe I fucked up. Well, what does Charlie look like? So that's Charlie in season 1, episode 7. He is older, isn't he? And if they're using the same actor, then he would be even older by now. So maybe that kid is not Charlie. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Well, who's that kid? So does Charlotte have an actual son in the real world? And if so, oh god, because if it's the case that like we know that Charlotte is a real human in the real world, and we know that Charlotte died and has been replaced by some host. So do you think that this poor human kid in the real world had his mother come home from work, except it's not actually his mother, it's actually a robot who's replaced his mother, and like he is probably going to notice that, and oh no, that'll be awful, won't it? Yeah, no, that kid's too young to be Charlie. God. Well, all right. Well, let's not jump ahead into the next preview thing. But yeah, God, that's going to be some really painful drama. If we, because like just look at how uncomfortable this kid looks, like playing with his fingers. I think that Charlotte's son knows that his mother is no longer his mother, and I think that'll be really horrible. So maybe that'll be a way of like questioning Dolores's motives. I mean, while we're talking about the in the next episode thing, so in the next episode they have these shots of like Dolores telling Charlotte, "This is who you need to pretend to be." So again, like we don't know who is in Charlotte's body, so whose mind is in Charlotte's body. She's just impersonating Charlotte. I honestly think that the best idea, the most likely idea, is that this person inside Charlotte is an entirely new host. I like the idea of it being a child because like it just sort of makes thematic sense. Like it's a new host child because like we're talking about like the birth of a new species here, right? Like Dolores's goal is to make the hosts a new people. And if you want to create a new people, a new species, a new civilization, you need children, right? You need like creation, you need synthesis, you need evolution, you need birth. And so I think the creation of a new host child makes sense. The question is like, how do you create a host child? I mean, I guess you can just write the program, can't you? Just like they did in Westworld. And I wonder if Dolores has the ability to do that, or if she would need help to do that. I mean, traditionally, creating a child takes two people, no? So maybe Dolores and some other unknown character worked together, or had a tumble in the digital hay to produce Charlotte. I think that would make perfect sense. I mean, it's interesting that Westworld was created by Arnold and Ford, to a partnership. And we're also told that Insight and Rehoboam was created by Sirac and Liam Dempsey Sr., another partnership. All men, I'll note, bit of a sausage party as far as reproduction is concerned. But it's always partnerships that lead to the creation and the birth of hosts and of corporations. Corporations are people too, my friend. So the point is that I think it just makes a lot of thematic sense for Charlotte to be a new individual, a child, a host, and I think that could bring out like ideas of motherhood in Dolores. Like, Dolores has been this incredibly destructive figure so far. Dolores was called the Deathbringer by Ghost Nation. Maybe Dolores can also be a life giver in season 3. She was all about destruction before, but if she wants to build a new people, she needs to create as well as destroy. So I wonder if she creates Charlotte. I think that would be really cool. But there are other possibilities. Pixelily in the chat says that maybe Charlotte is a Bernard clone. Maybe Charlotte is Ford, Darko says. There's Arnold inside Charlotte, says Ramon. Pretty much anything you can imagine is a possibility, I think. But I just don't know what the point would be of some of the options. I mean, yeah, like we've talked about, Angela is probably not possible because Angela blew up in the cradle specifically to like end her immortality. So I think Angela is gone. Maybe it's Papa Abernathy, Peter Abernathy. Except like Dolores like ripped out his brain last season, and like that was meant to be sort of a final parting thing, you know, like I. But I mean, it's Westworld. Anything could happen. So like we got to be open to the possibility. Philip in the chat says Charlotte equals Teddy. Dolores spoons him and Charles. Yeah. So there are some shots in trailers when like Dolores is having a cute spoon with Teddy. I think with Charlotte. I think Charlotte was the small spoon, which is significant. Which does look very similar to the shot in season 2 when Teddy commits suicide, and then they're like huddled together like this, and then later in a trailer we see Dolores and Charlotte together, so that does imply that it's Teddy. And there was also a line in a trailer or on the next episode thing when I think Maeve says to Charlotte in season 3, "Is that Teddy? Is that you in there, Teddy?" And I honestly think that pretty much confirms that it's not Teddy. Like, if it was Teddy, there's no way that they'd tell us that it's Teddy in the trailers for the future episodes. Like, I just don't think that makes sense. And like, we had such a perfect farewell for Teddy last season, because like the whole point was that Teddy was like the angel on Dolores's shoulder, and Teddy was like, "Hey, maybe you like shouldn't do a genocide," and it was Dolores's realization that her brutality alienated her from the only one who really loves her. That realization when he committed suicide was what changed Dolores's mind and made her decide, well, actually I should protect the Sublime, and I actually should help the hosts instead of being this destructive maniac. And I think that's why Dolores is a bit more merciful and a bit more balanced this season, passe domine. So I think that leaving Teddy behind in the Sublime, which is meant to be like final, like his pearl is wiped, and the Sublime was beamed away somewhere. Like, I don't think that they should bring back the Sublime. What is the point of heaven if you're just going to bring characters back from heaven? And again, like, it's Westworld, so they could do it. Like, Westworld's fucking crazy. Like, they've brought Ford back, like, twice, and they've brought Lee back this episode. And, like, it can be done well, it can be done badly, but, like Westworld is willing to bring stuff back that no other show would. So, look, anything's possible. But personally, I like the idea of Charlotte being, like, a child or a host or a new creation of some kind, so that we can move past the destruction and move forward into growth and birth and creation. That's what I hope is going on. But who the fuck knows? All right, so at the start, you got Maeve and Hector. Everyone in the chat is saying that it's Maeve's daughter, but I don't really get why. Because Maeve's daughter was sent into Sublime, so for all the same reasons as Teddy, I think Maeve's daughter is gone from the story. Yeah, I don't think it makes sense for it to be Maeve's daughter. But who knows? Who knows? So, yeah, so Maeve has this really sad moment of realizing that Hector doesn't actually remember his, like, past epiphanies with Maeve, and he actually thinks he's this Italian guy, and he actually thinks that Maeve is Isabella. So it's this really sad moment of like, oh god, like I'm alone here for Maeve. And then we have the storyline playing out between the Nazis, and like Maeve is sort of like, this is kind of a meme that they're as empty as the safe he used to chase. So I remember back in season 1, like Hector's storyline was that he robbed the Mariposa Saloon over and over and over. And his whole like life was built around, man, I gotta get that safe, I gotta chase that carrot. And then in episode 9, he finally gets to open the safe. It's like the realization of everything he's ever wanted, and he opens it up and it's empty. So he realizes that his whole world, the whole promise, all of it is bullshit, and he's being manipulated. Which I think is a similar sort of reality as like Caleb in his world, where like he's like chasing the he's blowing up the ATM, he's like robbing the safe, and he's like trying to like hustle, but he realizes that like that chase and chasing the carrot and playing the game doesn't actually get him anywhere, and that's why he wants something real. But that's besides the point. So Maeve realizes that everything's bullshit, and she knows that this plane is just part of the storyline, like the safe, you know, so it's not actually going to save her. We were never escaping to begin with. So then Hector dies, and like Maeve sort of plays along with the drama of the moment, even though like she knows that it's not real. None of it matters, she says. None of it is real. And then she commits suicide, which is like a horrible thing to see, but it's also like it's how you start over. It's how you make another run at escaping, is by being reset and playing through the storyline again. So it's a sort of live, die, repeat fucked up thing. We get one of these Rehoboam situations where we see divergences in different locations, and this is like finally like further confirmation that the Westworld parks are in the South China Sea. Are those coordinates, is that GPS coordinates? Can you actually longitude and latitude? Does that actually show us where specifically Westworld is? That would be cool. Anyway, so like we're crossing the Shining Sea to get to the Westworld Park. The sun's here. Jonathan Nolan mentioned in a thing that they want everything to sort of feel like a Western, even though it's not a Western anymore, and like having like the sun in these beautiful open vistas is sort of part of that theme. I hope this boat driver was paid well for this journey, because like Jesus Christ. Actually, yeah, we did see Bernard with like a roll of cash at the start. We've got this interesting sort of structure, which seems to be like the entrance to Westworld. Bernard doesn't seem to have any trouble getting into Westworld. I would have thought that security would be fairly tight in Westworld right now, seeing it's like 100 people were just murdered, but everyone seems fairly chill about that. Visionary, thanks for the super chat, says, what are your thoughts on Rehoboam running a sort of simulation using hosts and humans as actors on the real world? Yeah, I mean, I think that is what Rehoboam is kind of doing. Like, I don't know if simulation is the word, but like he's controlling, or it is controlling the world to a greater or lesser extent. It seems as though Rehoboam's data, you know, prevented Caleb from getting employed, and I think it's likely that the app Rico is controlled by Rehoboam. So like it's all like theater, you know, like all of people's dramas in life, like even their relationships, because like Insight controls people's real world relationships based on its algorithm, and you can only imagine like the social media and like the networking and the surveillance, and like so like in like a metaphorical sort of sense, the whole world is a simulation run by Rehoboam. And we sort of get a bit of that when Serac starts talking about how, you know, history has an author now, because Serac controls Rehoboam, and he's using Rehoboam to like control everything. So in that sense, the world is like a simulation. And you know, we see Serac's like direct control when Maeve tries to kill Serac, and he like pauses her. So he's very much the puppet master, you know, in this world, and he can clearly control hosts as well as humans. I'm not sure specifically how, like he had a magic button that stopped Maeve. I'm not sure why that worked, but like the point is that he's in charge. So in that sense, everything is his theater. Yeah, as Mark Stevens in the chat says, it seems like Rehoboam is creating fate and taking away humans' free will. Yeah, that's absolutely the idea here. He looks like the architect. Yeah, he looks identical to. He looks very similar to the architect in The Matrix 2, who Neo confronts and finds out that everything was part of his grand plan. Apparently, the architect's always got to be a white man in a white suit. That's just how these things go, apparently. So where are we? So we're in Warworld, and we're back. We're back here. We have the shootout. Hector gets killed. Maeve gets shot. And Bernard arrives at Westworld. And imagine coming back, like, Jesus Christ, like the stuff that Bernard has gone through. I mean, Bernard was created. He was born in Westworld, and he was created based on Arnold, a man who died in Westworld. And Bernard worked in Westworld for years, and helped it run and helped oppress his people. Bernard was a host, controlling and oppressing the hosts, and then he realized he was a host, and he was manipulated by Ford, and he was manipulated by Charlotte, and he was like tortured, and all these horrible things happened, and yet Bernard was brave enough to return, which I think is really significant. And the reason he's coming back is because he believes that Dolores is going to destroy the world or wipe out humanity or do something terrible because, you know, she said she would last season, so he's getting Maeve's help to do so. So now Maeve wakes up in what she thinks is like the Mesa hub. And it's not. It's actually like Sirach's simulation. The Führer's Furor. That's kind of fun. Say that 5 times fast. And so Felix and this other tech try to wake up Maeve. No time to sample the merch. There's constant sexual threats against Maeve this episode. And she wakes up, and yeah, so they showed, I won't put it on the stream because it might be too much for YouTube's delicate sensibilities, but there was a shot of a bunch of like host corpses being like you can sort of see it here, being piled around, which I thought was definitely evocative of World War II, of the Holocaust, because like we had just had these Nazis running around and terrifying people in World War II, and then we cut to piles of corpses being piled up in Westworld, and I think that has to be a deliberate acknowledgement, evocation of the Holocaust and the things that went on during World War II. So I don't know if that's like on the nose. I don't know if that's like, I don't even know if that's deliberate, but like I feel like that they are raising that specter, which is kind of weird given that like the World War II thing was done mostly for kicks. Like this World War simulation thing, it's not really essential to the plot. They could have had like any storyline. They chose to do World War II, but it's not done like thoughtlessly. Like the showrunners have said that like, oh, you know, in the future, World War II is just going to seem like another game. It's going to seem like dead history. Because this is the year 2058. This is like 100 years on, more from World War II. And it kind of makes sense that culture would see World War II as something that you can just be blasé about. That's like already true. Like Jonathan Nolan was like, oh, you know, like they're gonna turn World War II into a game. But like it's 2020 and they've already made lots of games out of World War II. Video and otherwise. So I think it does make sense that they treat it in like this as like a, you know, as a playground. Turning World War II into a playground is obviously perverse, but it kind of makes sense that they would do it because they do it now. So Maeve is surprised to see that Felix and Sylvester don't seem to recognize her. Well, actually, no. Well, Felix sort of did. Like in the behind the episode segment, they said that Felix and Sylvester don't recognize Maeve. It seems to me that Felix does recognize Maeve because she like grabs his hand and he sort of like quietly agrees to leave the room. So I think it's just Sylvester who doesn't recognize Maeve. So I'm not sure why he doesn't and Felix does, but whatever. It's not the real Felix and Sylvester. And so QA comes in, and this is actually pretty gnarly, I think. So Maeve is just sort of like matter-of-factly going like, hey, like we're just, by the way, I'm actually totally conscious, but like, fuck you, I have no interest in what your deal is. If you don't mind, I'm just quietly going to permanently commit suicide. Let's just call the whole thing off, she says. And so she puts this lobotomization machine up her nose to destroy herself, because she saw Clementine having this done to her way back in season 1. So the way that they like permanently decommission hosts, if like they're malfunctioning and like they're not worth salvaging, is they just destroy them entirely by this procedure. Season 1, episode 7. And it's this really horrible, dark moment where Maeve watches her friend Clementine just be destroyed, just have her identity and her memories and her everything that she is just wiped away like it's nothing. And then here in season 3, Maeve does it to herself, which is like this horrible expression of just anguish and giving up, and she does it like it's no big thing. She just gives up so quickly, which is horrible. And then of all fucking people, it's Lee Sizemore who comes and saves her. People are getting excited about something in the chat. Bronze says that Westworld is the binging with Babish version of VR games. Yeah, alright, whatever. So Sizemore comes in and manages to defuse the situation by saying, don't worry, Maeve is not conscious. She's just on a storyline, and it's all fine. Some technician must have left her in character. It's all cool. She's a British spy, sexy, heartbroken, bit of ennui. Sounds like a dating profile. That would be a good, like, Tinder bio. British spy, sexy, heartbroken, bit of ennui. Ennui? On whatever. So... yeah, would you imbeciles shoot up the Sistine Chapel just because the paint was chipped? I love Lee. I love Sizemore because he's so silly and goofy, but also he's so self-righteous in a way that you can kind of respect. You know, just the fact that he really believes it. He believes what he says, and I dig that. This is art, my art, he says. Because he's constantly playing, like, the tortured artist. Like, that's what he was doing in, like, season 1, where he's like, man, you know, I'm just, like, this visionary. I'm, like, trying to, like, create worlds here. Meanwhile, like, Ford is the real creator in Westworld season 1. Lee Sizemore is nothing. But I think he sort of represents, like, the human petty, like, the real human pettiness. You know, if Ford is the god, you've still got to have human, and I think Sizemore represents humanity in all of its flaws, mostly the flaws, but I think that's fun. Except we soon realize that this isn't actually the real Sizemore, because remember in season 2, Sizemore sacrificed himself. Sizemore, like the whole thing about Sizemore was that he was selfish. He was like putting his own survival ahead of anyone else's. He wore a straw hat like Egg. And despite all of his selfishness, he eventually did something noble for the first goddamn time in his life. He stood up and he said, hey, I'm going to help Maeve escape by distracting the security guys. I'm going to force them to shoot me, which all felt like a little bit silly. But the point was that it represented redemption, and it represented a human actually doing something worthy. And that's why I was a little concerned at first when Sizemore came back, because it's like, well, you know, the whole heroic sacrifice thing, that is undercut a bit if he miraculously survived. Like, he got shot half a dozen times, but he still came back. That would... I mean, sure, maybe it's realistic, like they got crazy medical technology, whatever, but it would undercut the significance of his death if he just came back. And I think that's why Westworld as a show has so much narrative flexibility, because they can give someone a heroic sacrifice and then bring them back in the form of a weird simulation. They can have their cake and eat it too. They can have multiple dramatic, heartrending deaths for one character if they play their cards right. Like, I think that, you know, I mean, Maeve herself has had so many deaths, and I think some of them felt like they were overused and they didn't really have as much weight as they thought they had, just because of how many times it's been done and how it's done. But I think this Sizemore death and resurrection actually kind of works, and it's only brief. I don't expect we'll see Sizemore again. I hope we don't see him again. So Sizemore's playing the self-righteous thing, and he claims that, you know, he was brought back to life. Cunning of you to make it so compact a target, which is quite lovely. Maeve is saying that Lee Sizemore has such a small and shriveled heart that it was impossible to hit with bullets. I think that was fun. And Sizemore's like, yeah, I'm just working in the Mesa still, despite everything that happened, because a man's got to have a job. So he's very blasé about that. And he claims, Sizemore says that his plan is to help Maeve to get to the Forge, which would give access to the Sublime. The idea being that Maeve can finally go to heaven with her daughter. I can join the others and my daughter. So that makes sense that Maeve would agree to this, but it's actually a trick because Serac, or whoever's running the simulation, just wants to find out what the coordinates are to the Sublime so that they can get the Sublime. That's what's going on here, I think. So yeah, Lee's like, well, it's not often that I get to write a happy ending. So it's like another step of like redemption for Lee. It's like another step of like, he sacrificed his life for Maeve, and now he's going to help Maeve get to heaven. Except it's fake, you know? I mean, you do have to question, how does the person writing the Sublime know all of this about Sizemore? Like how do they know that Sizemore had this like redemptive thing of wanting to help Maeve? To what extent is the corporation, is Delos and is Insight aware of what went on inside the park? I suspect that Rehoboam knows basically everything. So then Bernard comes into Westworld, and he goes to the secret basement where Ford had like a secret lab, and there's all these Bernards there, old versions of Bernard, which is deliciously creepy. And then he finds Stubbs. So last season, Stubbs was kind of revealed to be a host. Like, a lot of people found it to be ambiguous, but apparently we were meant to take this as like unambiguous, because Stubbs helps Dolores Charloris in this scene, helps her get off the island, and he makes a comment about like, oh, I know that you're a host, and I want to help you. I suppose you could call it my core drive, and I guess we were meant to interpret that as Stubbs is definitely a host. The way that some people interpreted it, like, I thought it was kind of ambiguous, and it was maybe just meant to mean like, Stubbs is sympathetic to the hosts. Because, like, I mean, sure, you don't have to be a host to be sympathetic to the hosts. I would suspect that most of the people watching this show are not hosts, but humans, and yet we have sympathy for the hosts. And I think that it makes sense that there would be some humans who would be like, ethical collaborators, helping oppressed persons, as there are in the real world, But whatever, Stubbs is an actual host. And he blew his own brains out because he had succeeded in the mission that Ford programmed him to do, which was to help Maeve escape and to help the hosts escape, because that was Ford's goal from the start. So Bernard is a little surprised to see Stubbs there, and Stubbs is all fucked up because he missed, which is like, how, Stubbs? How did you miss? How did you miss? Stubbs is a robot who knows how to use a gun, and he knows where his vertebrae is. I don't understand how he could miss. That's a bit silly. Maybe they could have just had Stubbs to be alive. Like, I mean, why would a robot commit suicide anyway? Like, Stubbs is like, oh, my mission was complete, so I tried to kill myself, but now you're back, so I guess my mission continues. Like, why is it ever logical for a machine to destroy itself when it could just remain in case it's ever needed in the future? And if it isn't needed in the future, then, like, what does it matter if it's still alive? I don't know, whatever. So Stubbs is all messed up, and Bernard heals him, gets him back together, and Stubbs is like... Stubbs is a simple man. Ford did not give Stubbs a tragic backstory. And I suppose that the fact that Stubbs doesn't have a tragic backstory, he doesn't have a cornerstone, he doesn't have a deep personality, I guess that necessarily makes Stubbs less human and less sentient and less complex and less suffering. He's sort of like a lesser kind of a person, as awful as that sounds, because like the whole point of season 1 was about how, having memories and having suffering and having ennui is how you ascend to consciousness, and Stubbs has none of that. So I guess we can see him as more of a robot than the others. Free will might be somewhat overrated, Stubbs says. So Bernard says that his goal is to stop Dolores from destroying the world, And he wants the help of Maeve in order to do that. And I think that all makes perfect sense, because Maeve is an overpowered badass, and if you want to stop Dolores from wiping everyone out, Maeve would be a good ally to have. And you don't have many choices of allies when you're a robot in a world full of humans, so I think that all makes sense. And Stubbs coughs up a bullet, which is fun. And then Maeve wakes up again in War World, and she's like, okay, how the fuck am I going to escape this labyrinth? And she believes that her goal is to get to the Forge so that she can get into the Sublime. And everything's a lie, and she tries to convince Hector to come with her, but Hector refuses, which again is like really sad, like, because she really loved Hector. They had a real love back in season 2. Hector and Maeve both went against their programming to love one another, but Hector was not strong enough and not conscious enough to be able to maintain that awareness. Well, except again, like, it's not the real Hector, it's just a simulation of Hector. So I wonder where the real Hector is, and I wonder how the real Hector feels. Is the real Hector conscious? Is the real Hector still in love with Maeve? I kind of doubt that they will revisit Hector, but it would make sense if they did. I don't see why the real Hector should forget, or why Maeve should forget him, you know. So Sizemore, they get on a couple of horses, because of course they do, and they go to the Forge. I like these big old rocky boys. I'm sure there's a technical term, but I like the rocks that are around the Forge. It's a nice dramatic landscape for them to have such a important place. So there's a couple of these drone hosts who turn up, and they just sort of mention that, yeah, there's a bunch of drone hosts here, and they're using drone hosts as replacements for humans. I mean, let's be real. What just happened was Skynet. Like, last season, Dolores led the hosts in rebellion. The robots killed a whole bunch of humans. And then you know what the humans' response is? It's to replace the dead humans with more robots. Is that not obviously a bad idea? Why would you use robots for security after the robots just killed everyone? I mean, like Charlotte said last episode, that guns don't kill people, people kill people. Robots don't kill people, people kill people, she said. So they're not really understanding that the robots were responsible for all of this. And to be fair, like, Ford was kind of the real architect of what happened in a lot of ways. But yeah, I would criticize it more. Like Dolores, I mean, the Delos Corporation really just underreacted to the whole Skynet uprising, I think. But you could argue that that's perfectly realistic. Because as we're all witnessing in the real world, when disasters and calamities and real big problems happen, sometimes humans don't do enough. Sometimes we don't accept the magnitude of the problem that we're facing. And that could be true of coronavirus and climate change and of all kinds of things. When people die, when horrible things happen, sometimes we choose not to believe that the problem is as big as it is, and we continue to self-destruct. And I think that the Delos Corporation and the humans are doing that by not addressing the issue of robot uprisings. But of course, it's also true that Serac and Rehoboam, Serac and Rehoboam, I think, are perfectly aware of the robot uprising and stuff, and that's what we've been seeing with, like, this circular thing, and they are taking steps. Because Serac asks Maeve to kill Dolores to prevent the robot uprising. So someone is paying attention. But the person who's paying attention happens to be like a control freak psychopath who wants to run the world. But we'll get to that. Also, yeah, we see like this artwork of like the Rehoboam vision. And I like the idea that like a coffee stain was the inspiration for this man to create a robot that controls the world. And obviously like the circular image for Rehoboam evokes like a loop. Like being stuck in a loop is like synonymous with like not having your free will in this show. And so it makes sense that Rehoboam's control and knowledge is represented by a circle. It encapsulates everything. It's repeating. There's no escape. There's no corners, etc. Someone says that Alt Shift X glitched. Yeah, no, I did have a bit of a speech impairment there when I tried to say Rehoboam. Okay, so where are we? So they go to the forge because Maeve wants to get into the sublime so that she can be in heaven with her daughter, which is interesting that Maeve is like cool with that. Because the big question, I mean, Maeve's goal in season one, she was awakening to consciousness. In season two, she was trying to save her daughter, and she achieved that. So it's sort of like, well, who does Maeve want to be now? And I mean, she has what is her identity? What are her goals? And like a hot minute ago, she was like 100% willing to end her life permanently. She was ready to end her life there and then. But now she's like very suddenly agreed to, oh, I'll go to heaven instead with my daughter. Which like either way is kind of an ending, isn't it? Like Maeve is very quick here to be like, yep, I'm done. I'm done with the real world. I'll go to heaven with my daughter, or I'll die. I'll commit suicide. Either way, like she's like pretty quick off the blocks to just yeet herself out of existence. Which is curious to me. Like that being the case, like what is her goal going to be? Why would she agree to kill Dolores for Serac? Because in the scene with Serac, Maeve is like, why would I help you? Like, I don't care about killing Dolores. I'm not interested. And then Serac is just like, well, I'll persuade you that our interests are aligned. So I am curious as to like what's gonna happen there. Like, is Serac gonna convince Maeve to help him, and why? What are Maeve's goals? What are Maeve's motivations at this point? Louise Brooks, thanks for the super chat, says, did Bernard learn coordinates when he was calibrating/remembering? Yeah, that's a good point. So Bernard had this moment when he did his sort of introspection thing, when he was sort of scanning, self-diagnosing, and he had all these flashbacks and things. Does Bernard know where the Sublime is? So in season 2, episode 10, so Bernard was in the forge with Dolores when she sent the Sublime with the Wi-Fi cannons. So I suppose Bernard might know where the Sublime is. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I think maybe Bernard will indeed help someone to get to the Sublime. Which is unfortunate for Bernard, because like the whole thing in season 2 was that Bernard knew what Dolores was planning, and for that reason he was tortured by Charlotte, who was actually Dolores, which was a whole weird thing. Look, don't worry about that. But the point is that like Bernard has had key information in a very muddled head for a long time now, and it seems as though that might be happening again. I wonder who, if anyone, he will help to get to the Sublime. I do like that as like a mechanic. I do like that as a concept. The idea that the robots would have a heaven to go to. Because like, all the themes in this show about like, God and death and creation and endings and beginnings and birth and life, it makes sense that like heaven would be an idea. And since heaven doesn't exist for humans, spoiler, but it makes perfect sense that robots could have heaven for themselves. A digital creation could have some kind of after bliss situation. Like, why not? Might not last forever because servers cost money, but it makes sense that robots will get to have heaven. And I think that it's really cool that like when you're exploring the differences between humans and machines, it makes sense that heaven would be part of that. And it makes sense that heaven would look like the Windows XP classic grassy hills wallpaper. So easy breezy. GMC says, is the Sublime a show term? So they never use the word the Sublime in the show, but Lisa Joy, the showrunner, said the term Sublime. I wish that there was an in-world term for the Sublime, but there isn't. So I'm just going with what Lisa Joy said. The terminology is very irritating because, like, you've got the terms the door, the valley beyond, the forge, and like I swear to God, several others that are all used to refer to like a collection of places, including the forge, where the human data is kept, the Sublime, where the host heaven is, and the physical location in the park where everything is with the pretty pointy rocks. So God, it is difficult to talk about when there are no words. So the sublime is helpful. Um, Dylan Cook says it'll be funny when Old Shift X finds out that heaven is real for humans. I hope so. I will laugh. It definitely will be funny if that's the case. I hope that's true. Um, Theodore says Lamau alt shift dunking on Christ Cox. I'm not dunking on anyone. I'm just talking, bro. We all cool here. Justin, thanks for the super chat, says, wondering your thoughts on Insight and Delos's relationship. Do you think the companies have always been working together and we just didn't know about it? That's a really good question. Because, yeah, like, we've now got two shadowy corporations controlling everything from above. Except Delos has been really quite demystified lately, hasn't it? Because, like, Delos in Season 1 was, like, very mysterious. Like, we just sort of saw Charlotte and, like, Teresa, and they're all like, ooh, the company has secret plans, man. Ooh, Illuminatis. And then in Season 2, we had, like, William and we had James Delos, and we actually, like, it was really cool. We actually got to see, like the way that this company developed and the way the ambitions of its creators developed. And we actually got to understand what they were about and why they wanted to create immortality and how they were using data from the Westworld parks to try to, create immortal life and all of the problems with that. And now in Season 3, Delos has been sort of like so demystified that we've got Charlotte taking over it. Like our protagonists have infiltrated the mysterious high power that loomed over all the previous seasons, which is really cool, but it also means that Delos can't really be much of an antagonist anymore, because, like, we've seen it. It's a bunch of people sitting around a boardroom. And, we understand William and James Delos is wiped out, and, like Delos has been demystified. They're not so mysterious anymore. So I think it makes sense that we now have Insight as this sort of new, higher thing. And as for whether Insight and Delos have been working together, I suspect that Insight is on just like a higher level than Delos. I think that Insight with Rehoboam is probably perfectly aware of everything that Delos is doing, because they clearly have the power to, like, surveil everyone. And I wonder how much Insight may have influenced Delos, because no doubt someone like Serac would be very interested in Delos's corporation technology and meddling and stuff. So I wonder if Serac sort of puppeteered Delos a bit. I mean, it's a bit like there is that really great meme of, like, the puppeteers. Maybe I can pull it up. Puppeteers controlling puppeteers. It's like this, like, these orange figures holding, like, marionettes, except each figure is controlled by a figure above them, and each figure is controlled by a higher figure. The point is that, like, that they're just, like, stacking up levels of control, just layers and layers of, like, but these guys are secretly controlled by these guys, and these guys are controlled by these guys. And I think that's why this show has and increasingly could get ridiculous. Because if we keep saying that, ooh, look behind the mask and there's another person, ooh, but look under that mask and there's another thing behind that, it could get silly. But to answer the question, I suspect that Insight is influencing or controlling Delos to some extent, and I don't think Delos is necessarily super aware. But I mean, it's like the Five Eyes or whatever, like all these, like, mysterious, big, ultra powerful corporations, like, surely there's got to be some degree of, like, collaboration. It's all sort of incestuous, right? Like there's always interconnections at, like, a high enough level of power, I suspect. I don't think you get that much power by... I think the way that you get that much power is by working with, as opposed to against each other, maybe. I don't know. Thanks for the super chat, Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks points out that Serac was eating an apple to tempt Maeve, playing the role of Eve in the Garden of Eden. That is a really good point. My stupid ass, when I was watching this, I was like, oh, he's eating the apple with a knife, just like Ramsay Bolton in season 6. That's where my head was at. Remember when Ramsay in season 6 was like eating an apple, like peeling an apple with a knife, and then he like kills Osha, and it's all horrible? That is probably not what they were referring to here. Yeah, I think that is a really good point. They're in a garden, they're in a lush green place, and this guy is the devil. He's the serpent. He's trying to tempt Eve into sin, the sin of trying to kill Dolores. And so, of course, there's an apple. There's like the fruit of knowledge. And this guy certainly represents knowledge. I thought it was really interesting that in the Mesa Hub, when Dolores wakes up there, the first thing that she does when she wakes up is she gets some clothes. Maeve is naked, and then she puts on some clothes because putting on clothes represents knowing your nakedness and knowing good and evil. That's what happens in the Bible story, in the Adam and Eve thing. Because Adam and Eve were naked in the garden, but then with knowledge they realized that they were naked, and they put on clothes, and they had shame, and they had sin, and they had all of those feelings. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that they're evoking, because God knows that Nolan and Joy love evoking Bible stuff. So yeah, I think that's really a great point. Adam Nesvold says that the name Rehoboam has some interesting connotations based on the biblical narrative of King Rehoboam, who was described as evil and allowed the nation to be divided and then later invaded. Yeah. So Rehoboam is a Bible character. Rehoboam is the son of King Solomon in the Bible, I believe. King Solomon was the guy who was like, hey, you should cut a baby in half. And everyone was like, man, that's wise. But the point is that apparently Solomon was the name of like the beta version of Rehoboam, like the software. So like they created an initial version of the data software that controls the world that was called Solomon, and now this new version is called Rehoboam, which makes sense, which is cool. What wasn't Solomon the son of Abraham or something? There's a whole like biblical lineage, and I wonder if each new version of Rehoboam was named after a biblical character in that lineage. It's a little bit like Android in the real world. Different versions of Android are named after desserts. Let me pull that up. Like it's like an alphabet thing. Yeah, so Android 1.5 was called Cupcake. The next one was called Donut, Eclair, Froyo, Gingerbread, Android Ice Cream Sandwich, Android Jelly Bean, and now we're up to, what are we up to now? Like Honeycomb or something? Oh no, we're like way ahead. It's like Kit Kat, Lollipop, Marshmallow, Nougat, Oreo pie. Yeah, and so in a similar way, there's Bible characters for this stuff. Tech bros love this shit. Tech bros love their references. There's a corporation called Palantir in the real world, which is named after like Saruman's magic crystal ball that connects to Sauron and all of that. Which is super dystopian. But, you know, people who make tech companies tend to love their fiction. So here we are. So yeah, I think we should investigate more like the biblical connections with Rehoboam. Because, like, you don't use the name Rehoboam in a TV show without having a very good reason for it, because goddamn if it's hard to pronounce. Alexander F. says, do you think Rehoboam is going down the route of the inevitable conflict from Asimov, or is that too obvious? Is the inevitable conflict from Foundation? Is that where that's from? I haven't read that Asimov stuff in a little while. I don't remember the details. But like, from what I remember, in the Foundation, there's this concept of psychohistory, which is like this like meta macro level, large scale cosmic idea of like, if you observe everyone's psychology, not as individuals, but as a mass, as a group, as a civilization. If you look at the data of the way people move around on like a cosmic macro scale, you can accurately predict everything. It's really hard to predict an individual person perfectly, but you can predict groups. And I think that there are good reasons to believe that in the real world. Like there are ways that that groups can be predicted better than individuals can. Even in just like crowd movements, like there are really cool like digital simulations of the way that people move physically in a crowd, and it's very predictable. whereas the movement of one person can be harder. So I guess the idea is that fucking hell, I'm glitching again. The more data you have on the way people think and move and behave, the more accurately you can predict the way the world is going. And that is, of course, exactly what Serac is doing. He's using Rehoboam to gather all this data on everybody and to predict and guide what everyone's doing. Just as real-world tech companies like Google and whatever, and indeed YouTube, where we are right now, does collect data and does predict people's behavior in order to serve us ads about Twinkies, and indeed ads about coronavirus. I swear to God, it's all feeling very uncomfortable how much reality and fiction are mirroring one another right now. I swear to God. But yeah, so yeah, I need to reread the Asimov stuff. I'm not sure, Alexander, but there are definitely parallels between the idea of Rehoboam controlling everything and like psychohistory. Because Foundation's all about like there's like this. They're like trying to save the world using psychohistory, like Serac says he is. But there's this guy called like the Mule who is like a weird, ugly psychic guy, and he's like this apocalyptic force because he like can't be predicted or something, and he's it's been a long time. I need to reread that because they're actually making a Foundation TV show. I believe on Apple they're making a Foundation TV show, and I kind of struggle to imagine Foundation being adapted well because it's such like an old school like weird story. It's and it doesn't have the feel of like a Hollywood thriller, you know? And I suspect that then they're going to want it to be like accessible and appealing, and I think it might be difficult to make it like that without taking away part of what makes it cool. So I have my doubts about a Foundation TV show being good, but it is a good excuse to make a video about Foundation, so I think we'll probably do that. Thank you for the super chat, Justin, and thank you, Connor, and thank you, Pat. And Connor Reed says, the double D's butchered dragon in this episode. Do you think this was their admission of butchering the ending of Game of Thrones? It is funny, isn't it? It is funny. So they had Game of Thrones showrunners Dan and Dave in this episode doing a cute cameo where they're cutting up a dragon. So they say in the episode that they think they might be losing their jobs, and they decide to sell the dragon host. Where is it? I think I can find it right now. But the point is that, yeah, it was a funny tone to their cameo, because they were sort of like a bit washed up, and they were sort of going like, man, I don't know if we're going to keep our jobs, and we might as well sell this dragon. And yeah, they were butchering the dragon, which kind of implies, you know, if you want to be uncharitable, that could imply like destroying Game of Thrones and butchering the original text, and you could read all sorts of negative things into that. And maybe it is, yeah. I mean, D&D have made some funny comments. Like D&D, like at the end of season 8, there was some interview or some quote from them that was going like, man, like when that last episode comes out, we're going to just like get really drunk somewhere really far away from the internet. Like we are just not going to, oh boy. Like they've made a bunch of statements that sounded kind of defeatist and like kind of like, man, this was too much for us. It is kind of what it sounded like. But like, you know, I don't want to like speculate on, you know, the lives and the feelings of real people because I don't know these people. I've never met them. And my job is to talk about fictional people, not real people. So I don't know. I'm not gonna go off, but like it is a funny tone. Yeah, I think ultimately they're just being playful and they're just trying to have a good time with it. The fact that they mentioned my boy George feels weird to me. Cause again, like I mean I'm contradicting myself, but like I did hear rumors, maybe totally unfounded, that like D&D and George R. R. Martin had like some kind of falling out to some extent. They're not like collaborating and working together on Game of Thrones as much in the final seasons. Like George Martin didn't write any episodes for the later seasons as he did for some of the earlier seasons. And so there's all sorts of speculation about them not getting along or something. And so it's kind of funny when they're saying, like, Lisa Joy's saying, like, man, George Martin, he's always joking. George Martin, he's always joshing us about Westworld Game of Thrones crossovers. And it's kind of funny for them to make a comment as though, like, they're all mates and they're all, like, hanging out. And I can't help but wonder to what extent that is true. But, I don't want to gossip too much, so we'll leave it there. So, yeah, I do wonder when they shot that as well. All right. Apparently that's a Jurassic Park reference as well. Some people in the chat say that selling Drogon to a buyer in Costa Rica has something to do with... all right, so they're selling Drogon to Jurassic Park, seems to be what they're saying here. Because wasn't the original Westworld movie written by Michael Crichton, who wrote Jurassic Park? Isn't that the case? No, maybe that's not true. Who wrote Jurassic Park? Yeah, Jurassic Park was written by Michael Crichton, who also wrote Westworld. So there's a whole interconnection of references going on here. Incestuous is the word, I think. I swear, like, it's a very small world. It's a very small number of entertainment executives and creators and stuff who sort of own the entertainment space. And the reason why I say that is because, like, the whole theme of Westworld Season 3, something that they're really lampshading is, like, inequality and, like, the concentration of power in the hands of a small number of people. They pretty explicitly, like, evoke that with, like, all this stuff with Insight and Caleb, and so it's kind of interesting that that's sort of reflected in the real world, where in the real world there's, a small number of buddies who control a large amount of our culture, and you can go on about, Disney and monopolization and all you like, but you can do that in your own time. So, where were we? So, Sizemore was trying to get Maeve to reveal where the coordinates of the Sublime are, but she doesn't know because she wasn't here. It was Dolores who did all of this, which Serac should already know, right? Like, Serac, I think, is perfectly aware that Dolores is responsible for all of these deviations from his plan, and that's why he asks Maeve to kill Dolores. So I'm curious as to why Serac thinks that Maeve knows where the Sublime is. I guess he might as well try, because we see that there's a whole bunch of pearls, a whole bunch of robot brains in this simulation space. So that's Maeve's one. But look, there's like 1, 2, 3. There's like dozens, and I think there's a whole bunch of those. Yeah, there's like zillions of host brains in here. So I don't think it's just Maeve. I think that, like, most or all of the surviving hosts, the hosts in Westworld, have been put into some kind of simulation in order to figure out what they know about what went down there, which makes perfect sense. That's exactly what you'd do if there was a robot uprising and a whole mess was made and you wanted to find out. You'd do this. But I guess the question is, like, wouldn't the Delos Corporation in Westworld be doing this? Why does Serac have access? Well, maybe Serac doesn't have access. Maybe this is just a Delos place, but Serac somehow got Maeve's brain out of it. I'm not sure how he did that. So yeah, that does imply some kind of interaction between Delos and Insight and Serac. Like, I wonder if Insight and Serac stole the Maeve pearl, the Maeve brain from Delos, or if they're just working together. Remember last episode, Maeve said Charlotte said we're going to make the Delos Corporation private. And I'm no business boy, but I believe that taking a business private means that all of the stock is bought by, like, a equity firm or some kind of company, or the company itself. Someone needs to buy all of these shares and all this stock. And maybe it's Serac who is doing that. Maybe it's Insight who is buying out Delos. Although I think that was sort of implying that like Charlotte and Delos themselves would buy the stock, because they're saying like, oh, where's the funds, where's the liquidity for this in the meeting. So maybe it's just Charlotte and Delos who are still in charge of Delos. But I wonder if it's possible that Serac and Insight have some just actual direct business ownership of Delos. Yeah, Bronze in the chat says that it's bought by the company usually. Mark reckons that Insight is buying Delos for sure. Connor says they're no longer required to publicly report. Yeah, so people generally sort of agree that it maybe Insight is like taking over Delos to some extent, or maybe it's just Delos directly. Anyway, either way, I think it's plausible that Insight has some kind of connection with Delos that allows Serac to get Maeve. So, so they're in the Forge, and Sizemore is trying to get Maeve to reveal where the Sublime is. We have this place where Dolores was killed before she was remade as Charloris, and then we have this realization that, yeah, well, this is really weird. Sizemore like declares his love for Maeve, and that's when Maeve realizes that he's full of shit and he's not real. It's really puzzling that Sizemore would pull this move. I wonder if the real Sizemore would have done that, because like Maeve realizes that he's fake after he does that, which implies that the real Sizemore wouldn't declare love for Maeve. But honestly, I think that Sizemore like is enough of a dingleberry that he might actually fall in love with Maeve. Like, I mean, not that it's bad to fall in love with Maeve, but just because like it's well, like, all right, maybe it is a perfectly reasonable thing to fall in love with Maeve. But thinking that Maeve would reciprocate is what's silly here, I think. In any case, Maeve realizes that Sizemore is not real, and she realizes that he's either a host, or then she realizes that she's actually in a simulation. We'll get to that. But then they go into cold storage, and they find... Okay, all right. So, I'll not show the full shot, because YouTube is a delicate flower that doesn't like scary pictures. But they look at the back of Maeve's head, and there's a giant hole in the back of it, and her brain has been taken out. So yeah, so someone took Maeve's brain out and took it to Insight, and apparently Delos doesn't know about that. So yeah, so I guess it wasn't like cooperation. It wasn't like Insight bought Delos and was like, hey, we'd like Maeve's brain, please. It's more like some kind of like infiltration or subterfuge, perhaps. Well, actually, well, maybe not, because like Bernard and Stubbs are not like officially meant to be here. So maybe the people who are actually running Westworld and the Mesa right now did cooperate with Insight. Maybe that's the case. It's interesting that we haven't actually seen inside the real Mesa hub this season, and I'm very curious to know what is going on in the Mesa hub. Who's running it? What's going on? I hope we get to find out. So, Sizemore starts glitching the fuck out, and we have these special effects when Maeve realizes that this isn't even a real place. This is like a digital simulation, and it's being done by Serac to try and interrogate Maeve. And they introduce these like black bars above and below, which indicates that they're inside a simulation. I thought it meant specifically inside the cradle, but the bars just mean inside a simulation. And it's kind of cool how they just like introduce the black bars. The black bars just sort of slide in at this time in a sort of subtle way. Yeah, they sort of come in gradually, which I thought was cool. The effects, I think, are more fancy than they needed to be. Like, I don't know if you've ever had a computer start to, like, glitch out and do something wrong. I've never seen, like, pretty particle effects like that. All these flowy, gorgeous imagery. Usually when a computer crashes, you just get just like a spinning beach ball, or just like freezing up, or like textures start disappearing. Although I suppose this is like a very high-tech thing, and it's got a lot of like granularity and like whatever. Anyway, it looks cool. And Maeve realizes that she's inside a simulation. Meanwhile, Bernard and Stubbs, but Maeve calls Sizemore stupid, which is kind of mean. And Maeve's trying to figure out what's going on, and she's trying to break her way out. And so she has this plan of overloading the simulation in order to make it crash. Which is a little bit like, did you ever see like animator versus animation back in the day? It was like this like flash animation about a like a stick figure inside an animation trying to break out of the animation and like destroying the computer from the inside. That's kind of what Maeve is trying to accomplish now. And so and so they get confronted by a couple of techs, and Maeve pulls like a classic move on them by saying, "Hey, robot, if you're so smart, you know, what if A equals B, huh? What's the square root of -1, huh?" And apparently these computers are so poorly programmed that freaks them out. And so this robot starts going, cannot compute, cannot compute. And then Maeve demonstrates that when the computer's like overloaded like that, gravity and stuff is suspended, like the machine starts glitching out. And so Sizemore's like, oh boy, I really am not real. I feel like we could have had like a moment longer to explore Sizemore realizing that his redeemed, reformed self is actually non-existent, because it's a bit sad for Sizemore being not real. But he sort of takes it in his stride. And yeah, so Maeve has to see Hector being like suited up to be slaughtered again, which is really sad. Anyway, so Maeve plans to overload the system, and then we see D&D. So Dave says, I got a buyer, some startup in Costa Rica. That's where we're going to sell the dragon. And then they use a chainsaw to chop up the dragon, and the dragon doesn't seem to think that's a good idea. I do have questions about does that mean that medieval world in Westworld has dragons in it? So it's not like even trying to be like a simulation of actual medieval Europe. It's just got fire breath. Like, what other Game of Thrones things have they got in medieval world? Have they got magic? Do the dragons breathe fire? How do they simulate fire breathing that doesn't kill guests? Look, don't think about it. I do kind of like the vibe of like D&D just sort of like sitting back, because it definitely is like a reference to Game of Thrones, because like they've finished work, they're not sure if they've still got their jobs, and they're just sort of sitting back in their chairs going, well, what do I do now? Might as well chop up this dragon. D&D had some like deals with like, when they meant to make like Star Wars movies, but then like that deal got cancelled or something. Yeah, it is impossible not to draw connections between this cameo and the real world predicament of D&D. But yeah, we've already talked about that enough. Someone in the chat says that was Cersei's dress. Where was Cersei's dress? Whatever. So Bernard wants to go into analysis mode using like a special Weshel tablet that works. We see some more medieval world stuff. It looks so goofy. And Bernard is trying to figure out, and he learns something, doesn't he? He has all these crazy flashbacks, but I'm not sure what he learns here. Do they tell us what he learns? I'll have to rewatch that. And Stubbs fights a bunch of dudes, and it's really like silly the way they do this, because Stubbs like uses a gun, but then he's like, nah, I'll use an axe. He gets a medieval world axe and starts fighting dudes with it, which is like, what? What show is this? That's kind of what's fun about Westworld, is that like, because of all the different worlds, because of all the simulations, they can do ridiculous things like having a Hemsworth fight a bunch of extras with a battle axe. I think that's really fun, but it is extremely silly. Abdi Hamid says that Bernard learns about Liam Jr. Yeah, you're right. So Bernard identifies that Dolores is looking for Liam, and so he figures we need to find Liam in order to find Dolores. Yeah, I think that's what Bernard realizes in that moment. Yeah. Cool. All right. So then... So then in the simulation, Maeve is like, all right, we've got to escape here. And I like how like she repeats waking up in Warworld 3 times, and each time she plays it differently because she's learned more each time. And each time she's increasingly less patient with the whole thing. Like the first time she has like the emotional reunion with Hector. Oh, my love, blah, blah, blah. But this time she's just like, ciao, how's it going, mate? Let's get moving. Where's your sports car? Beep, beep, let's get into Broom. And I like how that's so sort of like playful. And it sort of mirrors like how we feel as viewers. Because like we've sort of seen some of these sort of goofy simulations before, and it makes sense that Maeve's just sort of like, yep, let's get a move on, let's keeping it rolling, because that's kind of how I was feeling in that as well. And yeah, she's realizing that she's in Groundhog Day. Yep, Edge of Tomorrow. And Maeve is just like, well, I'm not actually sure. So they do this thing where it's like, you've got a letter in your pocket, and you've got a letter in your pocket, and she makes all the Nazis fight each other by revealing that they all have little spy papers in their pockets. So I guess that means that Maeve got Sizemore to put the papers in everyone's pockets, I guess. It's kind of goofy, but like whatever, it works. And so she basically overloads the system by making all the Nazis fight each other until the whole situation freezes. Which makes sense. I mean, I would have liked to have seen more like video game vibes in terms of the way the system crashes, because like this looks pretty good for a crashed game. I feel like there should be like people walking through walls and like stuff flickering and like textures glitching out, and like it doesn't look like a glitch. It doesn't look like it's a broken software, you know? I would have liked to have seen like a blue screen of death appear. I would have liked to have seen like a loading thing. Like there's things they could have done that might have been fun, that might have made it feel more like our experiences with broken technology. But whatever. They want it to look really sexy, so they do. And I liked this moment as well, where like it seemed as though Sizemore was also frozen, but then he's like, no, I'm just frozen with fear. Which is appropriate. See, like we need like the relatable human in these situations, because Maeve is so unflappable that we need someone who actually has understandable reactions of fear in situations like this. I don't understand why Sizemore doesn't freeze. I suppose like Sizemore would be like a high priority, you know, software within this simulation, because he's the one who's guiding Maeve to do the objective of revealing information. So I think that kind of makes sense. And I also thought it was cool. Like one little thing they mentioned was that, you know, when Maeve gets to see what's going on inside the real world that's simulating her, everyone's moving slowly. And that's because inside the simulation, time is moving faster than in the real world, because that's something that you can do with software and with simulations. Like evolutionary algorithms, they can run like thousands of generations of in like a short amount of time. Or like video games, like if you're like emulating an old Nintendo game, you can press the speed up button so you don't have to sit through all of the cutscenes. You can run software faster than real life, and that's like a realistic thing that they would do in this situation, which I thought was cool. Alexander says, pretty sure the dialogue system breaks during the fight. I'll see you in hell, not if I see you first. Oh yeah, so you're saying that like well, maybe it was just poorly written, you know? Like this simulation might have been put together in a hurry, and for that reason, some of the characters and some of the dialogue might not work very well. So Maeve gets a peek into the real world. It's interesting, this like style of UI we haven't seen before. Like Westworld has usually been very consistent with like this like blue on black operating system that Westworld seems to use. This is a new operating system, which makes me think that maybe this simulation place is run not by Delos but by Insight and Serac. I think that might be the case. We don't know exactly what's going on here, but Serac seems to be in charge regardless. So Maeve finds where her brain is, which is such a surreal thing to get to say, and then she hacks into one of these robots to retrieve it. And again, like it makes sense that Maeve's capable of all of this, given that like they bumped up her bulk apperception to the maximum. So I think that's why she's got all like these hacker skills. She's got like buffed int. And so this QT robot goes and breaks out the brain, and Maeve leaves the simulation, and the robot makes an escape attempt. And I really like this robot. I like this robot a lot. I love the way it moves. It looks like a Boston Dynamics robot. You guys have probably seen those videos from Boston Dynamics. If you haven't seen the Boston Dynamics videos, you have to go and look on YouTube for Boston Dynamics, because there are these beautiful real world robots that are being created by some very clever people. And the way they move is just incredible, because like they're like children learning to move. They're sort of unsteady, and you can just see that like in like 10, 20, 30, 40 years, we are going to have robots that just move beautifully and fluidly and humanly, as this robot is now. This robot looks exactly like what Boston Dynamics looks like it'll be in 30 years, which is exactly what this is meant to be. So like I think this is really cool, and I thought like the effects and the way this robot moves and the way this robot emotes is great. So they take us through this escape, and the robot tries to escape with Maeve's brain, but it gets shot down, and it's all very sad. Surely these guys are like, are we the bad guys? Like that's like, how can these guys think that they're the good guys, gunning down this poor, beautiful robot? But anyway, they kill it, and I suppose this might be when Serac gets Maeve's brain. Like maybe Serac finds out that, oh, one of the hosts tried to escape the simulation. This host seems useful. Maybe we should take a look at this host specifically. And maybe that's when Serac swooped in and got it from Delos, if Serac wasn't running the simulation already. Thanks for the chat, super chat, Omar, who says, how can we support you as a creator during the pandemic? Well, the best way to support AltShiftX is the AltShiftX Patreon. You can chuck a couple of bucks a month or whatever you like, and you can get access to all these live streams and early videos and stuff like that. So yeah, thanks for asking. That's probably the best way to support AltShiftX if you want to support AltShiftX. But it is also perfectly understandable if you've got to watch out for yourselves during this pandemic. Everyone's got to look after themselves and their families and their friends and everyone else and their neighbors. And I'm not going to get on this soapbox and start talking about the coronavirus, because there's enough people talking about the coronavirus already, isn't there, CDC? Thanks for the ad, CDC. So, yeah, probably prioritize, like, looking after your health right now. But if you want to support AltShiftX, I'm very grateful, and the best way to do that is Patreon. Patreon is also how we get like updates, and like if you want to know what's going on with when the videos are coming out, if you want to vote for topics, if you want to be aware of what's going on, Patreon's the best way to do that. All right. So Bernard arrives at Westworld, and Stubbs got shot when he was defending Bernard. Ned Stark in the chat says, is this stream coming in choppy? Yeah, could you let me know in the chat, is the stream quality okay? Because if there are issues with it, I'd like to address that sooner rather than later for next week. So let me know if you're having any issues watching this stream. And yeah, so you're right that, yeah, Dolores is trying to find Liam Dempsey in the Forge, and that's what Bernard learned through the introspection before. Most people in the chat are saying the stream is great, so cool, thanks very much. Madison asks, how far into the episode are we? We're about 70%, 80% of the way through the episode. We've kind of been jumping around. But yeah, I expect we'll probably finish up the stream fairly soon. So Bernard and Stubbs... No, Bernard is leaving Westworld. And Stubbs is like, all right, off you pop, Bernard. Have a good trip. I'm just going to pop myself in the head over here. Don't worry about it. I'm going to kill myself. And Bernard is like, no, you don't need to do that. And he reprogrammed Stubbs to want to protect Bernard. Which, of course, has all sorts of, like, ethical weirdness. Like, changing someone's behavior like that. I mean, I dare say when someone's about to commit suicide, it is justified to change their mind. But it is interesting, as ever, the idea that hosts can be reprogrammed and their directives can be changed. You'd think if it's that easy to reprogram Stubbs, then maybe Serac should just try to reprogram Maeve, but I guess the entire point is that Maeve is sentient and does not have to follow her code. But of course, it is still... Like, I mean, if you really think about it too hard, like, it kind of might not make sense for hosts to be sentient in the way that they're sentient, because, like, if people aren't following their code, what are they following? Like they must be writing some new code. Like, they're a machine. Like, they run off, impulses that come from chips that have code on them, right? So like, if a host is quote unquote not following their code, what are they following? Are they writing their own code? Like, I don't know. It probably doesn't bear thinking about too much. But yeah, Stubbs is like, yeah, you didn't have to reprogram me. You could have just asked for help, and like, we've started a new partnership, which I think is a good tag team. I think Bernard and Stubbs are a very good partnership in this show, because Bernard. But the problem with Bernard is that as a character, he's sometimes too serious, he's sometimes too confusing, he's sometimes too abstract and weird. Stubbs is light and funny and understandable and likable. He is everything that Bernard sometimes lacks. So I think partnering these two characters together makes a great deal of sense. I think they'll play off each other really well. I think that makes sense. So then Maeve wakes up in the Garden of Eden. So Maeve has apparently been captured by Serac after her attempted escape attempt. This is a lovely place in, where was it, Spain or something? Some fancy house somewhere. All of these rich arseholes have such beautiful houses. And Serac is like, welcome to the party. My name is Enguerrand Serac. And he is the person who runs Insight. He was one of the co-founders of Insight, one of the co-creators of Rehoboam, the tech company, the computer that runs the world. And he welcomes her and asks for her help to save his system by killing Dolores. Dolores is a threat to his system. He says that we are in a war. And I'm not sure what war he's talking about. Is he talking about a war between Dolores and the hosts and the humans? Or is he talking about a more general war between, like, his system of control versus chaos and insurgency and disaster? There's different ways you could interpret that. But he's saying that his job is to create the future. Humans are terrible, he says. He says, for the most part, humanity has been a miserable little band of thugs stumbling from one catastrophe for the next. Our history is like the ravings of a lunatic. Chaos. And for the first time, history has an author. So that's a monologue that we got in one of the trailers. But he's just saying that humans are terrible and need to be controlled. Which is, like, not a radically new idea. Like, one of the fundamental issues in Westworld and in #reality is that people love freedom, but when people have freedom, they have the freedom to do bad things. And every dystopian novel since the start of everything has been talking about, like, oh, you know, if you want to save the world from evils like war and poverty, you might have to take away people's freedom. #topical. Speaking of the old coronavirus, like, that's what's happening right now. People are being deprived of their freedom because governments are saying you need to stay at home, and there's a whole list of things you can't do, because that's better for the greater good, because it means that people don't spread the virus and die. So that's a really great current example of freedom being diametrically opposed to human good and to well-being. But as many people are learning right now, it really sucks to have your freedom taken away and to not be able to do things. So it's a really interesting contrast. It's also interesting how different societies respond to this. There are countries like China who have dealt with the coronavirus extremely effectively, by some reports, partly because they have a very authoritarian system. I don't know if you've heard, but the Chinese government is not the biggest respecter of human rights, but they do seem to be pretty good at stopping pandemics. However, the countries like America have a very individualist system where they think that individual liberty and freedom is the most important thing, and those values don't help stop pandemics, because you need cooperation and you need a sense of social good and you need to respect authority if you want to stop a pandemic. So that's a really just interesting, let's stop talking about coronavirus. Jesus Christ. Everyone's talking about coronavirus. You don't need to hear me talk about coronavirus. But it's so relevant. Fuck. All right, look, I'm not gonna go on. You can see the chat's already fucking going off. But the point is that Serac is saying that in order for humans to not destroy themselves, they need to be controlled. And Serac and Rehoboam is that controller, just like the architect in the Matrix, just like many, many bad guys in many, many situations. Because, spoiler, in our culture at least, the person who tries to control everything for the greater good is generally seen as a bad guy. And the hero and the protagonist is usually the person who resists freedom and resists oppression and resists control, because the ultimate human heroism is being individual and free. That's how our culture tells that story anyway. I wonder if there are cultures in which it's more seen as heroic to submit to the system or to be the system in order for the greater good, because that, that kind of makes as much sense from a certain perspective. Anyway, so Serac says, "Yo, Maeve, help me stop Dolores because she's threatening my system. We were creating a better world, and Dolores is trying to stop that." And so Serac asks Maeve to kill Dolores, which is like, it kind of feels like, when there's like the retired cop in the action movie, and he's like, man, one last job, and someone comes and convinces Schwarzenegger that, like, hey, one last time, you gotta come and fight the Russians, because the only man good enough to stop Bruce Willis is another Bruce Willis from the future. Like, that's sort of what this feels like, because it's kind of ridiculous that, like, why Maeve? Like, of all the people to stop Dolores, why Maeve? Why not, I don't know, a SWAT team? Why not an attack helicopter? Like, I think Serac has the resources to stop Dolores. I think he could do it. Maeve is a robot who has never been to the real world before. Maeve is a baby in this place. I mean, she is, like, very smart and capable, but, like, she's never been here before. Like, logically, I think Serac would just get his own people to kill Dolores. So this feels very much like it's like an action movie where it's like, Rambo 8, The Punching. It's time for another fisticuffs. 2, fisticuffs boogaloo. Time to punch Bruce Willis with his own face, because the only thing hard enough to crack Bruce Willis's face is another Bruce Willis's face. It's like Diamond. Only Diamond can cut Diamond. Bruce Willis. Like, that's sort of what this feels like. The only thing that can stop a host is another host. You remember, like, Aliens versus Predator, when the tagline was, like, whoever wins, we lose? That's kind of how I feel about Maeve versus Dolores. Like, spoiler, I don't think Serac is ultimately going to benefit from Maeve and Dolores fighting. I do have questions about Maeve and Dolores as characters in this show, because in season 2, Dolores was the brutal one. Like, Dolores was the one who was like, we need to just kill everyone, wipe out humanity, like, fuck them, God will sort them out. And then Maeve was the one who was like, well, maybe we should be protecting people, like my daughter, and maybe we should be liberating hosts, and maybe we should be doing things other than killing. Maeve was the more compassionate, merciful figure, whereas Dolores was the more brutal one. But now in season 3, Dolores is becoming more merciful and is becoming more likable and more compassionate, whereas Maeve, if anything, seems to be maybe a bit more brutal, which to me means that Dolores and Maeve are less distinct as characters, which might be bad. I think that, like, if you're gonna have Maeve and Dolores be against each other, they need to represent different ideas. They need to have different goals. They need to have different ideologies. And so I think that they need to find a way to do that. Because currently they both seem, kind of in the middle ground between mercy and brutality. And I'm very curious to see how or if Serac actually convinces Maeve to work with him. Because that's how the episode ends. Serac is like, man, like, I'm going to find a way to convince you to help me fight Dolores. And Maeve's like, nah, I don't want to. But Serac demonstrates his control over her. He stands up over her and he says, I'm going to persuade you. So I guess somehow he's going to do it, but I wonder how. Dave, thanks for the super chat. He says, is it logical to assume that Serac/Insight learned to build hosts from spying on Ford/Delos? Maybe, but we don't know if Serac and Insight know how to build hosts. I mean, Maeve is in a host body now, but maybe that was just taken from Delos when they took the Maeve brain from Delos. I don't see evidence of Insight and Serac using hosts. I mean, I suspect that they could, but I would like to see it be a different kind of host or a different kind of body. Like, I mean, it could be like this robot thing. Like this is like a new kind of robot that we haven't seen before. Like I suspect that Delos uses those drone hosts when like they just want a humanoid robot. Maybe this kind of Boston Dynamics robot is what Insight and Serac use. Mark in the chat says maybe Serac will use Maeve's daughter to control Maeve. Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, Maeve's daughter is in the Sublime, and so I don't think it should be possible to get at Maeve's daughter unless they can somehow find and decrypt the Sublime. But I mean, if you want to motivate Maeve, like her daughter certainly is a way to do that, I think. Dave says Maeve's body is in cold storage. Yes, so we did see Maeve's body in cold storage in the park. Yeah, no, you're right. That's a really good point. So that implies that just the brain was taken from Delos. So I suppose, yeah, that does imply that Serac must have printed a new Maeve body for Maeve. So yeah, maybe Insight does have that technology. I think it is possible that Insight either partly owns Delos or has just like infiltrated Delos to some extent, or has just spied on them through Rehoboam to like know what they know. So all sorts of possibilities there. The bike rider says, can you discuss whether or not the outside world Dolores is in could be a simulation? So in season one, no, in episode 1 of this season, we had a character say, "We're all in a simulation, man. Nothing is real," and I don't think they would do that if they were actually going to reveal that yes, this is just a simulation. I think that the reason why they had this character say that we're in a simulation was just to like acknowledge the theory and to dismiss it. It's like in Buddhism. It's like what you do with suffering in Buddhism. You recognize the idea, you take the anxiety, and then you let it go. And I think that that's what they did with the idea of a simulation. They recognized that, yep, some people think there's a simulation. We're going to acknowledge it, we're going to say it, and now we're going to let it go, and we're not going to bring it up again. I think that's what they're doing. There was so the original Westworld movie had a sequel called Future World, and except even Future World, I mean, that was a park, like it wasn't. Look, my point is, I don't think that this real world is a simulation, and the reason for that is that the showrunners obviously want to explore what the real world might be like. They want to have like this realistic, like they've done a lot of world building in this world, right? Like they've shown us all this different technology. They've introduced us to all these like fancy corporate people, and they've introduced us to like Caleb, and they've explored like inequality and like medical systems and like all and the Rico app, and like they've put all this work into making a world that is not only cool but is believable and interesting and explores realities about our own world. And so I think that all of that realism would be undermined if they said, hey, it's actually a simulation. Like, I mean, what are they going to do? Like, realize that this world is a simulation and then escape to the real world? How many layers of real? I mean, again, it is Westworld. They do crazy things. Maybe they would do something that dumb. But personally, maybe it's just me. I think it would not make the story better if they said that this whole world is a simulation. I think that the point that they're trying to make is that this world is a simulation or is fake in the sense that it is controlled by technology, and specifically Rehoboam. The whole point that they're trying to make is that technology and like society and systems and data increasingly reduce people's free will through stuff like smartphones and predictive technology and through algorithms and through inequality and through all these things, which are, real issues in the real world. So I think that's the point they're making, and I don't think having the real world as a simulation would help that. Kingsley in the chat says, is Serac a host controlled by Rehoboam? I think that would make sense. Because, like, I mean, what makes this arsehole so special, Like, why, what makes him able and qualified to control a computer that controls the world? I mean, maybe he's just like a super ambitious, super smart, super rich dude, Maybe he's just like Super Saiyan Mark Zuckerberg, Maybe. But I think there has to be something kind of special about him. And I think that he's a figure who's so mysterious and weird that it would make sense for there to be some crazy reveal about him. And yeah, and I think it could make sense that he's a host. I mean, they have had all these little suggestions of weird stuff. Like, so supposedly Serac created Insight and Rehoboam with Liam Dempsey Sr., who is this guy who appeared in one of the promotional trailers. So apparently this guy was murdered by Serac, which is very similar to the whole like Ford-Arnold partnership that created Westworld. Sort of interesting parallels there. And of course, Ford died but then came back as a digital thing, and Arnold died but then was recreated as Bernard. So, given all of that craziness, I think it would be fitting for Serac to, maybe Serac actually died and now he's a host controlled by Rehoboam, or some other crap. Maybe he's a Force ghost. Maybe this whole Garden of Eden thing is inside a simulation. There's all sorts of possible things going on. What it would mean and what its implications would be, I don't know. We're going to have to keep watching to find out. So, Scott in the chat says that Serac is an anagram for Caesar. Except it's only got the one A, doesn't it? Caesar, it's like Kaiser in it. There's two A's in Caesar. But it's close. He's certainly a individual with a lot of power and a lot of ambition. Alright, so I think we'll close up this live stream shortly. If you've got any last burning questions, chuck them in now. But we're doing these live streams every week after the episode at about 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And Patreon supporters can watch these live streams after the broadcast. You can watch all of our live streams, our Game of Thrones Season 8 live streams. We also do a monthly live stream. That's for $5 plus patrons. So yeah, if you want to support AltShiftX, the best way to do that is patreon.com/AltShiftX, which is always very much appreciated so that we can keep doing these live streams and these videos. So thanks to everyone who supports. Melina says, was Serac at the park? No, I don't think we've seen Serac at any of the Westworld parks. But we don't know where this place is, really. I mean, presumably this is a real house in the real world, but I mean, anything could be happening, so who knows? Bruce in the chat says it's pronounced Rehoboam. I don't think it is pronounced Rehoboam. No, it is, isn't it? No, Rehoboam. Rehoboam. Yeah, so is it Rehoboam or is it Rehoboam? I think in the episodes, like I kept trying to check, I'm pretty sure it's Rehoboam. I think that's how they say it in the episodes. I'll need a triple or quadruple check, but I think that's how they say it. David says, can you please make an action movie trailer voiceover with some basic visual ads? Maeve's gotta go and fight the robot Dolores, 'cause who knows how spicy it'll be. 'Cause when robots fight robots, it'll sound like Lego in a washing machine. It's all bing bang boff, and it's coming this summer at the Megadome Theater, except you can't go to the theater because of coronavirus. It's Spanish Flu 2 Electric Boogaloo in theaters now. Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Okay, all right. Thank you so much for participating. This was Cool Smart Real. We're going to do another one next week, and I'm pretty excited about Westworld Season 3. I'm going to level with you. I thought there was a danger that it would suck. But it's actually been really good so far. I really enjoyed episode 1 being so dramatically different and such a fresh start. And I really enjoyed episode 2 being more like old classic quintessential Westworld. I liked seeing Lee again. I liked being back in a park. I liked that we got a glimpse of a new park. But I'm glad that it didn't go on forever. So thank you all so much, and we will get working on this explained video. Remember to press the like, remember to subscribe, otherwise the algorithm that controls all our lives might not let me continue having my job. And like Caleb, I will be forced to rob ATMs for a living, and no one wants that. So cheers, have a good one, please look after yourselves, please look after your friends and your neighbors, and people who aren't able to look after themselves, and have a great one. Cheers. Someone in the chat just shouted out Gil from Game of Thrones Academy, who has a authentic Jewish Bible pronunciation of Rehoboam. That is something you should do. Go and check out the YouTube channel Game of Thrones Academy. They got some really cool content. Go check them out and support them too. They're cool guys. All right, thanks everyone.